I am pleased to open the meeting of the Board Policy Committee for May 11th, 2020. And we have 3 policies that we are going to talk about at today's meeting. Student conduct and discipline policy, search and seizure, and workplace harassment policy. So we'll start with the student conduct and discipline, and we're going to limit the discussion to the addition of language around the racial equity and social justice to align with the racial equity and social justice policy, and then also some language around the record keeping for disciplinary action. So the first is on the Res-J language, and can we have either Liz or Mary lead the discussion on that?
Mary, you're on mute.
Did Mary drop off? No, there she is. Mary,
you're on mute.
I'm trying to get off mute. Okay.
There you go.
So the language that's in red had been developed by, it was after a lot of discussions we had in the fall and early spring, and Maxine and Danny, if you recall, worked on a matrix of language is based on some of the input we received from students when Shanice did some of the work with stakeholders. And this language was in the matrix that they developed. What we failed to do at the last meeting was to include it. We had a discussion of a kind of a sidebar discussion that we had failed to include it before presenting it at the last committee meeting. And so Danny and I included the language that we had intended to put in earlier. Maxine, is there anything you wanted to add about it?
Not really. I'm just really excited that this is finally happening. We've been working on this in October, which is insane to me. And I'm really glad that the language that the students want represented is in this policy now. Yeah.
Okay, so can I just clarify that? So we have, I think, 2 different colors in language. We have red and blue. And can we assume that the red language is all related to the Res-J additions?
That's correct. The red is all from the matrix. Yes.
Okay. So do you want us to go through this like section by section with these additions? Just to, because I think this is the first time the committee has actually seen this, right?
Yes. I do want to clarify, there are 2, and we can wait until we get down to 4 implementation. There's highlighted language in red in C and D, and that came a little later, and that was from a discussion with between Brenda, Julia, and I about enforcing some of the expectations for what we will provide or how we will support students who are disciplined.
Okay. Well, let's take this page by page then. So on page 1, there's a new introductory paragraph. I'm not going to read it. I'm assuming people have had a chance to look at it. Does anybody have any comments, questions, clarifications about this first paragraph? Nothing?
Looks good to me.
Okay, so Haley, we good? Okay, I'm not hearing anything else.
I have a question about the word promising.
The first what?
The word promising. It says,
Where is that?
is that the district seeks, okay. To this end, PBS, we're on the draft student conduct and discipline.
Oh, yeah.
Am I correct in that?
That's correct. This is Danny. We typically try to use promising practices as well. Typically when the research community refers to evidence-based practices, there's a built-in bias against smaller population samples, of which communities of color are typically smaller. So often an excuse used as to why we're not studying or researching strategies that directly impact communities of color is that they're not evidence-based. And so that can often be dog whistle for exclusive language. So while we are a district that believes in the power of research and we think that we should be using that, we also want to leave room for the difference in sample sizes that are often accounted for in promising practices. Different organizations like NICWA have been really leading that cause locally here around sort of making sure that we use that type of inclusive language.
Great, thank you, Dan.
I would also say that to be truly evidence-based, that's a pretty high bar. It usually takes many years before something is generally accepted as evidence-based. So in the meantime, it's pretty common to have promising practices be included because even in addition to what Danny was saying, practices can have a pretty strong evidence base and not be kind of officially sanctioned as a quote unquote evidence-based practice yet. So there it is. Okay.
This is just a question. Is the PPS racial education and equity policy, I see it's underlined here, is that meant ultimately to be a link?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about the first paragraph? Okay, let's move down the same page to number 6. We have an addition of responsive/sustaining to cultural. So it now reads culturally responsive / sustaining instruction. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. Under B, we added utilizing a racial equity and social justice lens. We good?
Yep.
Okay, page 2. So the first red paragraph. This is about strategies. Okay?
Yep.
Okay. Same page further down. The next paragraph. Any questions, comments?
I am wondering if I'm just looking at the definition section. Whether the term cultural racism needs to be defined.
I can add that definition.
I think we should also be consistent with the reference to the racial educational equity policy, and we can clean that up later. And that I think that's just in terms of making that a hyperlink or referencing above.
Yep, good call.
Do we need to put it in twice, or can we take that part out?
I mean, you could just, in terms of a tightening, since you've already referred to it, you could just start the sentence with Portland Public Schools understand systemic and cultural racism and the presence of, so on.
Well, it also says that in the sentence before it. It seems like this is pretty redundant right here. District acknowledges that institutional and cultural racism impact disciplinary decision, and then it says Portland Public Schools understand systematic and cultural racism and the presence of bias. Couldn't we do one and just make that one sentence and then eliminate the racial educational equity policy, put the policy number up above?
Yep.
It says, because I think we need to reference the policy number in the introduction.
Yep.
And then you could actually just eliminate that. And then just in the second sentence where it says additionally, then you could talk about institutional and cultural racism impact disciplinary action and the presence of bias. It just seems like we're saying the same thing multiple times right there.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you want to work on it line by line, or can we take this part offline and just kind of clean it up a little bit?
Yeah, I think I'm okay with you taking it offline.
Me too.
Any objections?
Nope.
Okay. Okay. C, the addition of the district expects school practices that reflect racial equity and social justice as foundational values. Okay? Any problem? Okay. C2, well-researched and trauma-informed, resulting in safer schools, improved student achievement.
Fine with that.
I think there's a copy editing issue here. I think we need to have parallel construction. So we have well-researched and trauma-informed, resulting in safer schools, improved student achievement, improved student attendance, and you probably want to say something like a greater sense of self-efficacy on the part of students.
Yeah, this sentence doesn't. We'll look at that one too, Rita.
Okay.
That one doesn't make sense.
I mean, it makes sense. It's just a little awkward. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Page 3. Number 5. So we are still talking about school practices that. Okay. are committed to explicitly identifying disparities in education, should be educational outcomes.
Yep.
For the purpose of targeting areas for action, intervention, and investments. Any questions about that? Okay, number 8, are developmentally appropriate and in accordance with discipline of, I would say you want to.
Wait, Rita, I have a question about number 5. Doesn't number 4 cover number 5?
I feel like number 5 is broader. Like it's not just calling out, the issue, but is saying that we're going to be actively committed to paying attention to it. There could be a way to combine 4 and 5, but I like that, that are committed to explicitly identifying the disparities. I like that language.
So we might want to actually add something to number 5. In addition to explicitly identifying, we might want to say something like reporting on.
There is a reporting part down a little bit farther.
I thought there was. Where?
There is. There's a reporting piece a little bit down a little bit farther.
I guess what I don't see in number 5 is, so I think it's super important, but I don't see what the explicit link to discipline.
Yeah. I think number 4, we could work on number 4 to incorporate some of the pieces of number 5. But number 4 is about eliminating disparities and assuring equitable tiered interventions. And then number 5 talks about targeting areas for action, intervention, and investment. So to me, that's a very similar language. And so I think you could add some components into number 4 and then eliminate number 5.
Yeah, because just all the other numbered ones link in some way explicitly to discipline.
Right. Yeah. So are you okay if we work on that to just include some pieces of that?
That would make sense to me.
Okay.
So to make sure I have it, what we want to do is essentially incorporate 5 into 4.
Yes. Because a lot of those pieces in 5 are already in 4.
It's just more expansive.
It's just a little bit more expansive. So we can just expand number 4 to be explicit. I mean, we're not using the word explicit in number 4.
Well, I think it's kind of a
More than that.
well, 5 is talking about identifying what the disparities are, and then 4 is about what are you going to do to eliminate those disparities.
Right. So we could put in number 4 to identify and eliminate. As you could put in.
And start with the language. We are committed to explicitly identifying and eliminating disparities in applying discipline. But
I just
they're different things, though.
Well, and remember this sentence is referring back to the district expects school practices that.
Yeah, we're in a student conduct and discipline policy. So, I mean, I agree with Julia that it still needs to relate back to student conduct and discipline.
We will,
Well,
Can I
okay.
make a suggestion? Rather than do away with 4 and 5, can we just make number 4 explicitly about eliminating disparities and number 5 be more about sort of what you do with the information from the disparities, which may result in some larger work, but that's still focused on student conduct and discipline.
And I was going to say, on 5, it could be identifying the impact of disparities in discipline on educational outcomes.
Yep.
See, that would work better because then there's some link to the discipline and the conduct.
Because I have heard some pretty mind-blowing numbers about the impact of even one episode of exclusionary discipline. It's like for every episode, the probability of graduation decreases by 10% or something.
Oh yeah, it's pretty bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you're suspended in any time before 4th grade, so in 3rd grade or below, you're like 30% less likely to graduate and 40% more likely to drop out. It's bad.
So what I'm hearing is no, not combining 4 and 5 as I had first said, but to look rather at just working on 5 to link it back to impact of disparities on discipline and how they then impact educational outcomes.
Well, maybe not even talking about disparity. Sorry, I keep changing my mind every time I say something. And maybe it's identifying the impact of discipline, like different disciplinary actions on educational outcomes.
I think Mary and I should probably take that offline and just work it through a little bit more.
Yep. Okay. Okay, can we move on to 8? Developmentally appropriate and in accordance with the discipline of students with disabilities, and AD. So just a copy editing thing. Can we get a standardized way of identifying policies and administrative directors? Does the name come first or the number?
Yep.
Yeah.
I don't care which, but one or the other.
Yep.
And is that a link as well?
I think it eventually will be.
Mm-hmm.
And does this AD already exist?
Yes.
Okay. D. You're missing a comma.
I always am. Where?
It's okay. Particularly students of color, comma. It's 1, 2, 3. It's the 4th line down.
That was me, not Mary Kane.
I was willing to take the fall for you, Danny.
Okay, this is also maybe just a what's the norm that we use, or what we, and D, it says the responsibility of all adults. Are we talking about PPS employees, contractors, or are we talking about parents, community members?
I think it should be all adults that are part of our district, including volunteers and parents, because I think about that there's inherent bias in PTA and how that impacts the school, which impacts discipline. I mean, I think about events we've had at school where students get into trouble by parent volunteers say a student did something wrong, and then there's discipline that happens because it was a PTA event. I think having that in the forefront of all of us about our unconscious bias is important.
So I asked that question primarily because I'm thinking of examples like the one Ailey you just used. And I'm thinking that normally how we would respond to this in the AD or just our practices would be very employee focused. But in fact, I think this last year we had a lot of things that were actually driven by either parents or community members. That just thinking about how this gets rolled out, that we can obviously, just the requirements of, personal and professional introspection, acknowledgement of racism, just thinking about how we actually bring that into practice for the larger community. We obviously can do cohorts of employees and our contractors put that in there, but how do we embed this in sort of the larger community? And again, it's not that it doesn't have to be in here, but I would just think if we're making a pretty broad statement, and normally how things get translated, then it gets translated into like for our staff.
Well, paragraph E talks about that a little bit. Professional development.
Right. And again, I think that is thinking of like the staff in the staff context.
I'm wondering if we can link this to our adult conduct policy that we just finished earlier this year. And it does talk about volunteer training in that. So I'm wondering if it's not just professional development, but if we could add something to E that includes volunteer and community training.
That works for me. And I'm also not necessarily needing something explicit because I realize that may be in the AD. I'm just, it's a broad positive statement. And it's just, how do we live up to that if we only have partial capabilities or we're primarily focused just on staff?
Okay, I want to go back to D for a second. So I'm wondering if this is a pretty broad kind of value-based statements, and I'm wondering if it might not be better placed as the second paragraph in the introduction.
Yeah. It links to E, but I think that's a good suggestion. It's more of a framing.
Couldn't we look at introduction A and then D and combine those? Because I agree, it's really kind of an overarching statement, and we could combine some of the pieces of shared responsibility that there are principles that are embedded into our schools. I think that there's some really rich language in D, and actually I like it even more than some of the language in the introduction in A, because I think it really speaks to more of the heart of the work of what we're doing.
Okay, so how about we move that to the intro?
So we'll go to the second paragraph, and then we'll look at perhaps sort of making some slight changes to one in the first and second paragraph. The new second paragraph.
Yeah. I'll add it.
Yeah, but I'm rereading the existing paragraph A.
Mm-hmm.
I think these two paragraphs are different enough that you might want to tighten it a little bit, but
standalone.
Yeah, I think I think they complement each other nicely, actually.
In the introduction part, Rita?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll put that in the second paragraph.
Okay.
I already cut and pasted it.
Did you? Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. Okay. Do we want to talk any more about paragraph E?
It's now the new D.
It's now the new D, right? But we have been talking, and Julia was talking about how do we make that real. So I'm inclined to think that we can leave the language as it is, and as a district leadership needs to figure out how to do this.
I agree with you.
I'm
Okay.
sorry, where are you, Rita?
1E, and this is where Ailey asked that we link to our professional conduct policy.
Okay.
We could also link at the end to our professional conduct policy at the end of the policy. Where we talk about other policies that are in conjunction with this one. So we'll certainly do that.
And I was also calling out that it says we're going to do this through professional development, which automatically then assumes that the adults we're referencing are staff. And I know that in the adult conduct policy, it defines staff as including volunteers.
It's
broad. We want to make it more explicit here that we include volunteers as part of the professional development. So if there's a way to put in maybe and volunteer and community trainings.
The only thing that concerns me with that is that this is a student conduct and policy, student conduct and discipline policy, and volunteers are not responsible for that. I would hate for it to become confusing that we're adding volunteers into the language of this.
Well, but you already have, because you say it's the shared responsibility of all adults, which would include not just paid staff, but also volunteers. And then in paragraph E, it says everyone in a school who has direct contact with students is expected to utilize learning opportunities. So you've already included them, whether you intended to or not.
So I just want to give some context with the professional conduct policy that refers to adults, not staff, right? Adults. That's how it is. I'm going from memory, but I'm pretty sure that's right. And there are some conditions to participate as a volunteer or a contractor to complete training, which isn't exactly a mandatory prerequisite here. So I just want to, we're right to think about them together and how they are similar or different, but the context is a little, this is permissive language, and there's some mandatory language that we expect with the professional conduct side. So for that.
But I think if the whole point of this is to establish behavioral expectations among all adults, I think we want to retain this kind of language, don't we?
It's about your expectation of mandatory versus permissive, right? In order to be in any one of these adult roles, are we requiring you to do certain things? Because we haven't quite said that in this policy on this conduct the same way. That's a policy decision that hasn't yet been made, so it's hard for me to get the language. That's maybe my point more succinctly stated.
I mean, my expectation would be that if we're having just thinking about my own personal experiences and learning, that if I as a volunteer am working with a student in the hallway and I come in and say the student's been misbehaving, the teacher is going to write a referral based on my word. Mm-hmm. But I might be bringing bias in to my interaction with the student and my own stuff. And so then the teacher trusts the adult, even if the adult is not necessarily operating out of the same framework that the teacher might with that student, if that makes sense. So I think having an expectation that we are, I think as we're looking at moving our RESJ things forward, I think that high standard, we expect our adult volunteers to be examining their own biases, to be, being around our students in a way that respects who our students are and is trauma informed and is racially aware and sensitive. And I think, having that in our language of our student discipline policy, those volunteer, and I'm thinking about field trips, and I'm thinking about mistakes I have made in the past when I was often given the difficult kids on a field trip, and some mistakes I made in discipline or interaction with those students because of my lack of knowledge and my own biases. So how do we say we're going to change that culture?
And I'm not trying to talk you out of it. Let me be really clear. I just want to be clear what the expectations are. Is it that you can't volunteer until you've completed that training? That's not what this language says. So I just want to make sure we're clear about what the board's expectations are so that staff can assess and then implement. Give feedback now and implement when engaged. But I'm not, it's not a substantive dispute at all. It's not a dispute. It's just,
it's just
what you expect and when you expect it.
Right. And I would say I would expect volunteers to attend training, but the question is, do we say volunteers can't volunteer without the training? And I know, like, my experience at Llewellyn is we have people volunteering and going on field trips and being in classrooms with students who haven't passed background checks because there's nobody closing the loop of checking to make sure the background checks have been executed. So when we mandate this stuff, it's how do we, that's the management side of how do we actually live into it.
Yeah. Mary, can you take a note of that so we can follow up with Llewellyn?
Yes. The volunteers do have a kind of a truncated training that they do. It's on the volunteer side.
That was 4 years ago at Llewellyn.
Oh, we've changed.
We've changed it.
Changed since then, so you're fine. But my job is a volunteer and check. Sorry.
This is Jonathan. Hi everybody. This is Jonathan Garcia, Chief Engagement Officer. So Director Lori, that is as you know, this year we brought on Raptor as the new kind of platform that allows us insight into the adults that are making their way into our schools and classrooms. And so as part of that, we've had to update some of our mandated trainings as well and so Mary has been working on that. So just wanted to give that insight as well. So we've been working with security services on that.
Well, and my point wasn't, I know that there's been huge improvements, especially since this administration took over. But my point was sometimes that what the policy is and the expectation is not always lived out at the local school. But I'm sure that's all changing.
Totally.
Okay, so we okay with the language as it currently stands?
Yes.
Okay, Liz, did you get the whatever clarification you wanted?
Yes. The answer is the language okay as it stands is the answer. So thank you.
Okay. Okay, next page. Can we take these in order? So we're going to go with the blue.
Mm-hmm.
This is about the records, disciplinary records. Okay, so the first bullet point, available to parents and guardians and students once they are X years of age. I don't see an actual age there. It may be my printer. Maybe.
Yeah, it says 18 years of age.
18, okay. Okay, so parents and guardians can get it always. Students have to wait until they're 18.
Correct. Yes.
Is there some reason for that?
They can certainly review records. They just can't
Yeah.
They just can't get a copy of them. The parents can, because they're the guardian, the custodian.
FERPA's rights flow to parents.
Yep.
But once students reach majority, even if they're in school, it flows to them.
What about emancipated minors?
That would be the exception.
You just add and or emancipated minors.
I'll put it in there.
You doing that now, Brenda? Okay.
Yep, just did it.
All right.
And just refreshed so that it's current.
So do students have the right to look at them?
With their parents.
Okay, suppose a kid wants to look at his or her disciplinary records, but doesn't want to involve a parent. Can they do it?
I don't see any, I don't know of any person that would not review those with a student. I think that Liz or Mary, you'll have to weigh in on what the law says in regards to FERPA.
As I said, the rights to an educational record belong to the parents. It's not to say that students are excluded, but the right to review, the right to receive the records themselves belong to the parents.
I guess the question is, by implication, Mary, and I don't know the answer, does the student have no right to see it?
To view it? I don't think so. I think, and John may want to weigh in on this as well. I don't think there's nothing in the law that says students are prohibited from looking at their record.
Do they have the right to? I come in to the office as a student without my parent. I'm not 18 and I want to see it. And someone says no. Do I have a right to challenge that as a minor student?
I don't believe so under FERPA.
We can confirm by email to the board, but I think that's the question. I actually don't know.
Yeah.
So
it's a great question though, because I think one of the things is we want to just be really clear and transparent of like what's allowed, because it seems like sometimes we have cases, or when I talk to parents and students, frankly, and high school students, they don't seem to have a sense of like what they have a right to see. So it seems like being clear of what those rights are would be important.
There's a student records policy, I think, isn't there?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it addresses that specific issue, but my understanding is I think FERPA provides the right to parents or eligible students, and eligible students is defined as like emancipated students or students over 18. But I think it's specific to I'd have to double check, but I'm pretty sure it's specific to parents.
I agree with John. I think I don't see that there's any. I don't recall, but we can do a review that there's any language that says a student cannot say view their discipline record in Synergy, but it's not how the law is written. It's written parent focused.
Right. But if there's no prohibition, we could establish more expansive rights than exist under FERPA, right? That wouldn't be a violation.
Right. I don't think it would.
Okay, so
we'd have to look again to see if a parent could object. I don't see that. I just think it wasn't. I think it wasn't written from that perspective of that students would even entertain the idea of looking at their own records.
Which is interesting to me. It compared to HIPAA, and kids well under the age of 18 have the right to see their medical records. In Oregon, I think it's 14. And they can exclude their parents from looking at medical records at that point.
Yes.
FERPA is pretty clear that it's 18 is the.
Yeah. FERPA is different.
Right. No, I get that. But
We have
anyway,
2 students on the call with us, and so I'm wondering if either of the students has any thought on a particular piece.
Yeah, I'd just like to advocate that if it's not in violation of FERPA, that we do make it a student's privilege, at least, or their right to view their own records. It maybe if the parent objects for some reason, that could be a different scenario. But if the parent doesn't directly object to them viewing their records, then I feel it should be their right.
So
I will go ahead and add it so that we can look at what FERPA says.
okay.
And we'll just align it to what FERPA says.
So can you guys go back and look at FERPA? But if anybody objects to what I'm about to say, let me know. I think we probably want to have it, have the language reflect that a student can look at their own records.
Right.
And however you need to word that to conform with FERPA.
Okay. We'll look into this issue.
Yes.
So what's interesting is, so I've had 2 kids who graduated from PPS and one from a private school. And on graduation, the private school actually sent the entire student record, which included the PPS records from K through 8. And it never even, and we never got the ones from the PPS students, but it never occurred to me ever as a parent, even when there was some pretty substantial issues at the school, to know that I had the right to look at my students' records other than like an academic record. It was pretty interesting what was in the file.
What I can say for the disciplinary hearings, because this is the conduct and discipline policy, is when they're and Brenda, you can speak to this better than I. But when in the notice that goes to parents about your student is being disciplined for whatever incident, there's the information that it also contains the information that the school is relying on. Isn't that correct, Brenda?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That we provide.
And in the student and parent, the policy handbook, the student conduct policy handbook, whatever that's called, there's information in there in regards to viewing a student's records. And then for special ed, it's part of their parents' rights, their due process procedural packet that talks about that. So we notify parents about them being able to review their students' records through multiple means. What we can do is look back into the handbook to make sure it's explicitly stated. I don't have the handbook memorized off the top of my head, but we can certainly look in there too. I think that'd be a good place to make sure that that language is explicit.
Yeah. Again, I think we probably can't over communicate. I mean, I'll just say, so I was in PPS for 18 years, and depending on what your kids were doing, you either read things way more closely than sometimes than depending on the child, what was in the book. And so I just think being as transparent in a number of different ways. So if you're a parent who maybe skimmed through that big handbook at the beginning of the year, or maybe you did one year and you figured it hadn't changed, or you hadn't read it in a while, and then something happened, and then maybe you're looking at the discipline policy, it's just good to have it there.
Yeah. Yep. Okay, we put it down there to align it.
Okay. Okay, any other issues with this, with the paragraph F?
I'd just like to, kind of clarify that I feel it should be made explicit whether or not a student can, once we figure out specific FERPA, once we align the policy specifically to FERPA, but just so that it's made explicitly clear whether I do or do not have my own rights to view my policy.
Okay.
Or my records, sorry.
We'll look into that issue specifically and get back to the board.
Yeah.
The board committee about this.
Okay. All right, move on to Roman numeral 3. We have red language. Superintendent shall establish a structure at the district and school level to monitor progress on student conduct, including annual demographic reporting and a resulting Res J analysis to the board. Any questions, comments about that language?
I don't know what an RESJ analysis to the board is. Is that described somewhere?
Isn't that disaggregated data about discipline?
But it already just says including annual demographic reporting, and that's by law. So we have to report that, all of the demographic data by race and by disability.
In the grid, there's like more, we proposed having more information in the AD. So the last time we brought this forward to the committee, we were sort of like saying that we wanted to have the detail here, and folks said this is something where we'd have the detail in the AD. So we reference it here, and then in the grid, you'll see both for this and the other policy, for the search and seizure policy, we have more details of what that could look like in the AD.
Okay, can I have a copy of the grid?
It was included as part of the materials for this meeting.
It was? Okay, perfect.
Okay, so I think we might have to mess around with this language a little bit. Including an annual. So what kind of report are we looking for? An annual report on.
I think we've heard both from the board and from our community about folks wanting to sort of see the aggregate of the RESJ policy and the resulting work plan that we have reported out. And so this would be part of that. So that's in development. But I think that separate from just demographics that are reported and required by law, we want an analysis that's done in alignment with our policy and the work that the district's doing around racial equity and social justice.
Okay, but I think we also want a report about, because the Res J report is going to be highlighting underserved students. So students of color, students living in poverty, students with disabilities. I think we also want to have a more general report on the disciplinary actions that have been taken over the course of a year. Broken out by other things. I mean, like age, grade,
and we do
like
that. So that's in your, that's by school. So we do it by district and by school, and by grade level, ethnicity, disability, gender identification. So we already do it. So I can change the language because we've established a structure at the district and level to monitor progress on student conduct. And that's reported in with each school's demographics and their school improvement plans.
Okay, so you do an annual report,
Yeah.
What is it called?
We don't do an annual report. We post all of the information around student conduct and discipline, around suspensions, expulsions, by grade, by demographics, including ethnicity, disability, gender identification, grade level. I think that's it. And so we do that at a district level. So we create, I guess it's a report. We create a report on that at the district level, and then it's also something that you can see by school level. We also then, so if you go to B, we monitor the progress on that with the principals and our student conduct, our conduct and discipline coordinator. And then in C, you can see that the structure is connected to our improvement plans. So this whole thing talks about the way in which we collect the information, analyze the information, communicate the information, and then create changes so that we can continue to reduce disparities.
Okay. In the annual report that currently exists, does it break it out by the offense? I mean, like, what is it that prompted the disciplinary action?
No, we have that information. We can certainly add that at a district level. We wouldn't want to do that at a school level, right, because the N could be too small. And so that would violate FERPA. But we certainly can do it at the district level. And I don't know that we don't do it already at the district level. I would have to check with Dana Reamer to see if we do.
I know it has been done in the past, but I don't remember if it.
Yeah, I just can't, off the top of my head, I can't remember.
Because that analysis can be pretty interesting too, especially if you can.
It's very interesting, especially the subjective.
Yes.
Disciplinary, that's the one thing that we are targeting.
Right. Especially when you correlate it with race and ethnicity.
Exactly. So those are the more subjective ones that we've been targeting specifically in our elementaries, because based on the data that talks about students who are disciplined before fourth grade and their trajectory, we've really put a high priority on that. Until we're not in school anymore, but
right.
But that's what we've been focused on, and really talking about our tiered supports and about our behavior support plans, and making sure that we are progress monitoring and find things that work for kids to keep them in school and keep them engaged. And so that's been a lot of our MTSS work as well on the proactive side.
Okay. Can I make a suggestion in this A? I think we might want to mess with the language a little bit, because an annual demographic report sounds like it's just demographics. So I think if you can just play with the language a little bit to make it more explicit. I mean, I'm guessing there already is a name for this report.
Yep. There is.
I just don't know what it is. So if you could say that and then explain what is meant by the Res-J analysis of it.
Okay.
Hey, Brenda.
Mm-hmm.
When we talked about this the other day, I forget in what context, but you said that it already was on the, if you go to the PPS, you said that the annual report on discipline is already posted there. Where is that?
It's the Restraint and Seclusions. It's the annual report on restraint and seclusion.
So that's not actually.
I have to look at it. I haven't been to it for so long.
We also have one on discipline.
Yeah, I think
I
so.
have to-
Aren't there two of them posted there, Mary?
I have to go into the page. I think I haven't
Well, I'm
been
just-
there in a while.
I'm just wondering if we really want to create something if we already have something.
We already have something.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Just use the name. If you're already doing it, then just name it.
Okay.
Yeah, for some reason I can't. My internet is down here, but it seems like I think it's good to report to the board because it was news to me that it's like on our website. And I just think it brings additional focus to have to get the materials pulled in. I guess I'd also want to see, what actually it is that's posted.
Julia, it's in our system planning and performance website, and there are a number. It's where they collect the data for. We have achievement reports, cohort graduation rate, and then there's a specific one for discipline and behavior. So you can look there.
So is that you have to go to departments or
you go to the system planning and performance, and it goes by year, and then you can pull up discipline referrals, major discipline. It has a number of different subcategories. And it does it by school. It doesn't identify what, it just says that it's major. So it's expulsions or it's major discipline incidents.
I'm sorry. Okay, I'm 2 clicks down to that. Where on the department? I'm on the department page. Where is it on the department page?
You go to the, if you look to the left side of the page.
Mary, I don't know if it's worth you sharing your screen with everybody.
Jonathan, that's where I know how to do that.
Hang on. So we're already over an hour in. Can we do this offline?
Yes, I can show you afterward.
Okay. All right. Let's
Rita. Hey, Rita.
Yeah.
I'll send it off to you. What's in there? I would just say this is like 4 or 5 clicks in. And this isn't probably something that's got to be in the policy, but we should align the names and then just make sure that it's the right thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm guessing something that already exists, but so here's a place to name it, and then explain what would be involved in the Res-J analysis of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm going to move on to paragraph E.
Yeah. So Julia, this is something you added. We had agreed under Roman numeral 4 implementation under letter C to say including academic instruction and supports. So did you?
Hold on. I gotta click myself out of the deep into the systems planning and performance. Okay, so I didn't feel the other. Sorry, after the conversation when I actually saw where it got added, it didn't. It seems sort of just like a separate piece sitting out there. If you could, can you tell me again what section the other? I know the other.
Right below it.
It's right below it.
Under C.
Yeah.
Or C.
So.
We just.
So I guess you could leave C, but what I'd want to add is, also to maximize instructional time. And just for everybody else's sake, what the conversation that Mary and Brenda and I had between the meetings trying to capture this is these cases where you have, students who are on the, delayed expulsion route. It can take anywhere from 3 days to over a week to get their hearing scheduled. So they're out of, depending on whether they have a lawyer or whatever, the circumstances are getting a hearings officer, so they're out that period of time. And then the 3 weeks at the Student Success Center, there's a lot of challenges. It's not just, hey, they're in their afternoon classes. So part of the concept is that, I guess, Brenda, I didn't see that you're capturing sort of this goal of trying to maximize, even if they're going to be excluded from school, or maximize their exposure to the curriculum, because some students are going to be out automatically for at least a month, or in partial school, in all or partial school for a month.
Well, so my concern, and Liz or Mary or John, you can weigh in on it, is I think that the wording in E is in conflict with implementation letter D, because if students have been expelled, we provide information about alternative programs, but we would not ensure that students will have access to educational resources related to their class schedule. So that's my concern, is that we're in conflict.
Well, I don't think so. So the statute for students who have been expelled, we are required to provide them, you're right, Brenda, information about alternative programs. What I'm reading E is exclusionary discipline, which would, in what I'm hearing Julie reference, is suspensions or delayed expulsions. We haven't expelled them. The problem with E is there are some students who are, and I can't speak to this as well as others, but when they're suspended for some reasons are given home tutoring. Sometimes there are some students who, and again, the statute allows for us to do an evaluation of a student before they can return, or if they're special ed, they have an interim educational program. So it's not going to look like their school schedule. Tutoring is 5 hours. The state has determined that a week's worth of education in a class is equal to 5 hours of one-on-one tutoring.
Yeah, and exclusionary discipline to me includes expulsion. So I would just think that we would want to put suspension or delayed expulsion, or while they're participating in the Student Success Center or alternative plans. I just think we want to be more specific, because I think that it just contradicts, to me in my head, that contradicts each other.
So I'm fine with either one of those solutions.
Okay. So are you okay if I just work on it?
Yeah, I think you know what I'm trying to get at, which is it's really hard for a student to miss a month of full-time school.
Can I make a copy editing suggestion? I like the idea of you guys going back and figuring out more specific language, but I don't think it should be under Roman numeral 3. Should be under Roman numeral 4.
Yeah.
Yep, that makes sense.
And within D or under D, close to D somewhere. Okay. Let's move on. Okay, under Roman numeral 4, C. Under this policy, resources, including academic instruction and supports, will be allocated to support a trauma-informed approach. Any problem with that language? Okay, and then D, I'm assuming that when you take a look at the language for E, you're also going to have to look at D. And so I would bundle those together, and if you could come back with some language on that next time. Okay?
Yes.
Okay, I think that's it. There are a couple things. That's it for the suggested language. There is at the very, very end a thing about policy review. It says this policy will be reviewed every 5 years.
So those are my comments, Rita.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's not about this policy in particular. It's about this is the first time I recall seeing an individualized cycle of review that's different than the general cycle of review. I just want to call out that there's already a policy that says how often policies need to be reviewed and whether this is intentionally different than that. And then my second comment, the noting the revisions of this, I think I advise us to get away from the practice of putting one-time events into a policy itself that may last for years. That can be in a resolution or staff can just do it, but the policy should be
how it would be. There's some people to talk to. There's some policies to defer.
So I think just to clarify, I don't think anybody is talking about getting rid of this section on definitions.
Mm-hmm.
I think the only question is the placement of it and maybe some of the language.
Yeah. When words or when, the phrases that are later defined appear earlier in the text, unless you read the entire thing in its entirety, it's at the very end. Could say just a bracket or something, definitions at the bottom. Just for ease of digesting the policy, I suppose.
Yeah, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Liz, that or Mary, that you do normally like explain definitions at the beginning of a legal document. But because we're trying to make this an accessible policy, if we had that note that things will be defined at the end, is that accurate?
I think, these are not statutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you will see definitions at the beginning of statutes. The policies are meant to be accessible to give people information who are looking for it. So I think we can have flexibility about how we do that.
Mm-hmm. So my note is to move definitions. What I'm hearing is to move definitions to the end of the document.
I don't know that it's not a terribly long document. And
Yeah,
so I don't know that you need to drop a footnote to say this thing is coming, given that
That's true. It's not 20 pages long or anything.
Right.
So alternatively, I think, so I read the wrong document, so this is, I'm just now reading this. And 2A, that first sentence is pretty legalistic.
Reasonable suspicion is a legal term. I didn't know how to.
Well, okay. So what I was thinking was maybe if you flip it, so you've got like the legal definition as a first sentence.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe if you just make the first sentence include the examples, and then have as the final sentence in that paragraph, if we need to have a legalistic definition for the cops, or
it's for our. I mean, I can try to put it in friendlier language. It's about being able to use. A person should be able to, that when they say specific and articulable, they should be able to articulate what it is that caused them to, for example, go into the student's locker, right? What was the thing that they not because I had a hunch. That's not that's not articulating the thing, the evidence or the information that was received. So that's what I'll try to find a way to make that an easier read.
So I guess I think we're going to leave it up to you guys. I mean, I think there's a way to say this so that, real people can understand it.
Yeah.
I
How
do.
about just are based
Not
on,
to suggest that attorneys are not real people, just to clarify, but.
Thank you, Rita.
I was gonna say, how about based on facts that are specific and can be described or can be articulated? Because articulable is like
Yeah.
not a word that I think most people use.
That is
I
a
love that
decisive
word.
word right there. Yeah.
I agree that we can make this more approachable, and we will do that. We are going to work really hard not to change the legal standard because it is a thing. And so
So that's what I'm saying. You may want to have some language that actually says what needs to be said, but put it at the end of that paragraph, not at the beginning.
or we may drop a footnote that says nothing in this definition is intended to alter legal definition. I mean, like Mary, let's take it offline and
Okay.
figure out how to do that. I do. So we'll do that.
Yep. I think we can. I think we can come to I think we can marry the two ideas. We can keep
protect students. So
Yeah.
that's why you want to. The people who will be relying on this will actually be the students whose lockers were searched, and so that's why we want to make sure it's fair and enforceable.
But we'll work on it.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Moving to number 3, framework. Any questions there? That first paragraph?
And that had already been added. I'm sorry, that was when Danny and Maxine approached us with the matrix that they worked on and the framework, the ResJ framework. So that's
okay.
That had been included earlier.
Okay, so going further down, students and parents shall be notified. Students and parents / guardians will also be notified of complaint procedures available to them.
That was asked, I can't remember who was asking about that, but what that would look like when we have talked about developing, students asked specifically for some sort of complaint process in the event that they believe that it was an unreasonable search.
Okay. So does such a process currently exist?
It currently does not exist. We are creating, we would have to create this. And so we'll have to put that into the administrative directive, which is also on hold as we're refining this.
So we this language responds to a request that we heard, and we certainly want to have all students, community members, anyone understand what complaint processes are available to them. I will just note, not related to this specific topic, that we are increasingly by statute and now by our own decision-making, making ourselves responsible for notifying those in our community of certain rights at certain times. So we see it, we'll see it in the harassment policy that follows, where the legislature says it's the employer's obligation to provide a whole lot more information than this here. So I just want us, I'm not saying that that's good or bad necessarily. I just want us to be aware of the obligations that are being created either by the Oregon legislature or by our own decision.
So Rita?
Yeah.
This isn't in new language, but for some reason it looks new. So I'm just going to ask this question. In the second paragraph, it says parents and guardians shall be notified after a search of a student's person or property. I thought that the parents were notified beforehand.
Law enforcement.
So this is a case where it's not law enforcement. So I'm sorry. And maybe I'm just, there's so many.
I think it's interview versus search, right?
Right. It's a search conducted by a school administrator. The school administrator will not be calling the parent prior to get approval. They will be doing it after. They will be notifying the parents afterwards.
Okay. So The before is if somebody in law enforcement were doing it.
Exactly. It's the difference between, because the stakes are higher. When law enforcement are doing it, there's potential for criminal liability, which is not the case often, usually, when administrators do it.
Okay, wait a minute, but hasn't this been changed? So this currently says parents, guardians will be notified before law enforcement does anything.
That's correct.
That's what we decided.
But I thought, okay, maybe I'm forgetting, but I thought we decided that they needed to approve.
Oh, I see.
Didn't we? Isn't that what?
Yes.
Where are you now?
That's in the third set. Interviews shall take place with parental guardian consent. I can put that up higher.
Yeah, it just says notified.
No. If you go down further in the body of it, it says parent guardian shall also be notified before any law enforcement conducts an interview of a student. And then it says lower down, I think.
I think that's
too low.
Yeah, that's confusing because.
Yep.
I think you can combine. Why isn't it just parents, guardians must consent must give consent prior to any law enforcement interview or something like that?
Yeah, what you just say shall also be notified and consent before any law enforcement conducts an interview.
We can do that except for the specific, there are a couple of instances where they wouldn't be notified beforehand. And that's what
that, Mary. We can.
Yeah. So
you can
that's
just do a comma except for, and then list the exception.
Yep. I'll move the consent up to the top of the paragraph so it's clearer.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Okay. Number 4. Tracking system. So this is a tracking system of what? What are we tracking?
The number of, it's going to go back into this is the number of searches that are conducted. So it's different than the conduct in that we believe that there may be searches that are done that I think that fall directly within the concerns that our racial equity, educational equity policy and our residential work is trying to identify. It's that bias that is causing some students to be searched, and it may end up with no discipline. So it wouldn't be currently collected because we're not collecting searches, we're just collecting discipline.
So are we saying here there are going to be 2 different tracking systems? Because it sounds like they could usually be combined into one.
I think it should, but it probably be combined with the tracking that's done through Brenda's team.
I think we really need someone on that team to tell us how it's best tracked. I'm not sure I know how it's going to be best captured and combined. It makes me nervous about understanding the internal systems.
Okay, so we don't that doesn't even need to be in the policy because you guys can just do it. But I do think we want to say tracking system for searches and seizures.
Somebody's typing, so it's hard for me to hear again. What did you say, Rita?
Just clarify what we're tracking: searches and seizures.
Oh, okay. Yep. Okay. Okay. So.
Okay. Any other questions on this? Okay. All right. So can you come back by the next meeting with language?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and then the next one is workplace harassment. Can we do this in 23 minutes? I think we can.
Let's go for it.
So, workplace harassment. And
I think this is the first time you've seen this one, isn't it?
No, we saw it last time.
yeah, I thought we did.
Okay. Oh, that's correct. Yes, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember. So one of the questions that Rita you had was what was the breadth of this harassment policy? Is it are you already employed? But it's application for employment as well. So so discrimination in the application process is part of this policy.
Okay. And I think
the other thing you had asked, but I did not change, was you had asked about some ban the box language. But when I looked at the statute, the ban the box doesn't necessarily apply for educational agency when there's direct work with children. So I did not include it in the policy.
so. We might want to look at that because, I mean, it seems to me that there are certain, criminal history issues that we would not want to ignore, anything related to child abuse or sexual assault or stuff like that. But I can imagine there are quite a few other criminal offenses that we would probably not want to exclude people because there are real racial and ethnic implications there. So all of the people who were busted for marijuana way back when,
right,
a reason not to allow them into a school,
I think
well,
the scope of this policy right now, though, right? I mean, that broader.
That's the background check, yeah. And we have I can't speak to it fully at this time, but within our background check, I don't know if it's a policy or it's our process. We have another matrix of looking at what criminal charges and also the time. So a drug offense from 10 years ago is not going to, and there's also statutory language, for example, for bus drivers, I can't remember.
Right.
It's in a period of time when they, it's 3 years or 5 years, if they've had any sort of traffic infractions, their ability to drive a school bus for us. There are certain limitations, but I don't know that it's I agree with Liz. I don't know if it's part of this policy.
Okay, so maybe elsewhere?
I think it's a broader conversation, Rita, in a different policy I'd want Sharon at the table. I'd want to think about the statutory licensing schemes that exist for many positions that we have that already have some criminal background.
Okay.
Disqualifying pieces. I think, and when I think
I can get more from
harassment, I think we don't have to solve that in this policy.
Okay. Okay. So is there any language that's different in this version over what we had the last time?
No.
Okay.
So can I just ask a question? I'm not sure. Maybe this is the same question Rita was just asking, and I'm just not following. So it says this includes harassment that occurs in the workplace or off district premises. So does that mean harassment within the PPS community or exclusively? So you can't harass a coworker or a volunteer or contractor either in a PPS school or like out on a field trip or in the
Or
community.
texting them at home late at night, or yeah, I think it's that it's not clear. Is it to you?
Well,
Is that
I guess my question is, does it need to involve two members of the school community? So for example,
yes?
okay, well that's not clear. Is that what Rita
Okay.
is asking?
No, she was asking a different question. So where
This basically says if you're a volunteer or contractor or board member or employee, you have to avoid harassment, whether you're in a school, which I think is what we mean, or anywhere else. And obviously that's not what we mean, right? I mean, we'd like that to be the case.
Yeah, we'd like that to be true, but I don't
We'd
think
like that to be true, but it means
what
the
are you
standard
saying,
we're holding
Julia?
is like right? It's like it's between two members of the school community.
Exactly.
No matter where it is.
Yes.
It's really against employees. I mean,
Pardon?
it's really by any of those people against an employee.
Right.
Let me clean that up a little to make it clearer.
It's just because it's a separate sentence, so it makes it sound like we're setting a standard everywhere.
Yes. I can just it could be, this includes harassment of district employees that occurs in the workplace or off district premises.
In the
first paragraph, if we just, oh, go ahead.
How about all district employees, blah, 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 must avoid any conduct or action that could be characterized as harassment of another employee, whether in the workplace or off district premises.
Well, is it just employees or is it those whole categories?
PPS employees. I mean, they shouldn't do it anyway, but are.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay.
I'll make that change. Thank you for the save, Rita.
So just to clarify, so if we have a PPS employee who harasses a volunteer, somebody who is volunteering in the same school, does that qualify as workplace harassment or no?
It's an interesting question in this policy. It is workplace harassment and it should be prohibited and there should be action taken. I think and Mary, you've worked with this a lot more than I have. So
yeah, I mean, I think we can look, we have a general anti-harassment policy and I think we would look at that policy for purposes of harassment toward a contractor or toward a volunteer. This policy is born of a specific legislation that is the protection of employees. And
okay.
So that's what this is about. And because there are very specific requirements on the district or of an employer for these employees, the notice requirements, there's a 3-month, every 3-month process where we are required to check in with the employee who's made the complaint to ensure that they are receiving the supports and services they need, things like that. So it's very limited to employees.
Okay. Can I make a suggestion then?
Yes.
Could we have a footnote at the end of that to say something like, if, for harassment, I'm just going to say it. So harassment directed toward a non-employee, C policy, whatever.
Yeah.
Does that help, Julia?
Yep.
Okay. Anything else with this policy? Because I think we went through it last time, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah. So, any other questions? Okay, so Mary's going to make a couple of relatively minor changes. Does the committee feel compelled to review this again before sending it on to the full board, or are you feeling comfortable enough that we can just, if you send us the changes by email?
I can do that.
And the next board meeting's, I think, the 26th. So we have time too. It's not rapid.
So, Julia, Ailey, are you okay with that?
Yeah, can I just ask like one last? So the answer is yes, but can I ask a question about something?
Sure.
So, do employees know? Because I didn't, that we have a human resources complaint hotline.
Oh well, so that's the requirement that we have to develop that. So I've been talking to Sharon about putting that into place. Once this policy is in place, that will go into the AD. Sharon is working on this piece.
So it's not that we didn't know about it, but there'll be one, and there'll be some way for people to know that there is one. Okay.
Right. We're creating this as a result of the legislation.
Okay, but I'm sorry. It doesn't look like that. It looks like that was existing language, or is that just existing language from the first time we?
Let me look. Can you tell me where we are?
We are on 6B. It looks like that's current language.
No, that's
hotline.
No, that's new. I don't know why. I don't know why it didn't highlight. I cannot figure out why it sometimes highlight and sometimes I don't. Or red line.
It's clippy. Okay, so I guess I have to. Are you done, Julia?
And I just go back. Do you really want a footnote, or do you want me to just add an 11 that is any harassment directed toward?
Yeah, either which. That's fine.
Okay.
Just something.
I'll do it as an 11.
Okay, so I was just looking at something. It was under the sexual harassment thing. And it said non-employee. Oh, where is it? Okay, I'll look through it.
That's under 5.
5?
I think that's it when you're looking at.
Yes, sexual harassment by subordinates or non-employees.
I think that's to be volunteers and contractors. Should I change that language to?
Well, it's more like a question. Like you said, this applies to only employees, but apparently, in this case, it also covers non-employees.
They are being harassed by subordinates or non-employees. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry.
No, that's right.
Except you're right. There's something. It's off, but it's the offending staff. There's a.
I think we need to wordsmith that, Mary.
Yeah.
Yep. Let me fix 5.
Okay. So I think my last question is paragraph 2. Workplace harassment means conduct that constitutes discrimination.
Isn't that language in the statute, Mary?
Yes, yes. This I pulled from the section of the statute that talks about discrimination in employment.
It's a very broad
Okay.
definition, Rita. It's
Okay.
very broad and I think not thoughtfully drafted. Evan Salem.
Okay. Okay. So that's all I got.
Think about how big that is.
Okay.
Is what it is, right?
Yep.
Okay, any other questions about this?
Can we just make sure that whenever it comes to the board that we have what's the new red line?
Yes.
Yes. Did I sound?
Yes, you did.
That's not directed at the board members. It's directed at the systems, just to be clear.
Exactly. No.
I was gonna say, is this when we insert the derogatory statement about the new platform?
Okay.
We're just exposing all of my weaknesses.
There's a system issue.
Okay, I think we're done with this.
Okay.
Okay, so, all right, we have 6 minutes left. And I think we forgot to, do we know if anybody wanted to make public comment?
There were no requests for public comment.
Okay, good thing. Okay, so anything else that we need to cover? Did we forget anything? Liz?
I think that was the, I'll have to switch my screen back to the agenda, but I think we covered it.
I think that's all we had.
Yep.
Okay.
And then we only have 6 minutes left, so I think that was good.
Okay. So we could chat for 6 minutes, or I could give you 6 minutes back. What's your pleasure?
You run a tight meeting, committee chair Moore.
Well, it wasn't clear half an hour ago that was going to be the case, but anyway.
I do want to chat, just that I want to tell everyone that my husband is home, although he's quarantined in the basement now, but he's finally back after 10 weeks. So
awesome.
Great.
He gets to be set free on Wednesday for Paige's birthday. So we're excited about that.
Oh, nice. Good.
And he promises me he's going to cook dinner forever now, since he's missed so many times cooking.
Nice.
He'll come to regret that. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm trying to come up with really demanding recipes that I need him to make for me.
So on Sunday nights on PBS, there's the Great British Baking Show Masterclass.
I'll start DVRing the episodes for him. So I should have known about that earlier.
Okay. All right. So I guess that is it. And so thank you, everybody. This meeting is adjourned. See you in 3 weeks.
Thank you.